two, one, and we're recording. Dr. Eben Alexander, back in the saddle for the third time, author of Proof of Heaven and Living in a Mindful Universe, two of my favorite books, which I have talked about extensively on this podcast. I don't think you need any further introduction. You're well known as it is, but we left last time talking about MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and kind of how growing research into psychedelics can really tie into everything you wrote about, not just in Proof of Heaven, but personally, although I think that's a more well-known book, I like Living in a Mindful Universe even more because it's how to, number one is the story, number two is how to apply it to your life.
Right.
And nobody wants to hear my stupid voice talking, so let's go right to you. What's coming down the pipeline, or how can psychedelic research, medicinal research, tie in with living in a mindful universe?
Well, I think it ties in very well. And also, I'd like to kind of confirm your, proof of heaven, from my point of view, is a big question mark.
Hmm.
It simply says, yes, these are very real experiences. There are millions of reports out there. They're absolutely part of the human condition, but how do we make sense of them?
Yeah.
But living in a mindful universe is our attempt to do that. After 12 years post coma, what have we learned? And that book goes a long way into uniting the science and spirituality.
Yes, sir.
You bring up a fascinating kind of line of discussion, and that concerns the use of psychedelic drugs. Now, first point I want to make is I do not recommend the casual use of these substances by people out there at large.
Yeah.
I think they can be very dangerous. If you have any kind of mental or spiritual instability, that experience can kick you over the deep end.
Hmm.
And yet, there is incredibly promising research that's going on now that I hope someday will turn into, a system that will be usable by people. Although, truth be told, Karen and I often in our talks and book and presentations make a big deal of the fact that you don't need to take a plant medicine or a psychedelic substance to get into very deep aspects of primordial mind and the shared consciousness. Binaural beats,
Hmm.
sacredacoustics.com is a powerful way to do that. In fact, in his book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, Christopher Bache, Bache, actually compares his use of binaural beat brainwave entrainment, which at that time was a fairly primitive form back in the 1990s, but he compares it very favorably with his use of high dose LSD for spiritual work and says that the sound can get you as far, if not farther, but it does take a dedicated and more prolonged program. So I believe binaural beat meditation can actually accomplish everything that you could ever hope to accomplish through psychedelic drugs. Having said that, there are some very important lessons that I think emerge from the psychedelic drugs, and there are two major kind of avenues of that instruction. And the one I'd like to start with is the evidence. Anybody who's ever taken psilocybin or mescaline or LSD or DMT probably imagined that their brain was lighting up like a Christmas tree to explain all that incredible phenomenal experience they had. And yet, scientific investigation at multiple centers around the world has revealed that's the exact opposite of what happens. If you use functional MRI, if you use magnetoencephalography to look at the brains of people under the influence of these plant medicines or substances, what you find is every region of the brain actually decreases in activity. There's no place in the brain that increases in activity. And in fact, in one of the earlier studies, it was from Imperial College London by Robin Carhart Harris and others back in 2012, they actually used a visual analog scale to kind of map the depth and profundity of the phenomenal experience of somebody on those medications. And what they found is the more profound and transcendental the spiritual journey they witnessed, the phenomenal experience of it, the more their brain went dark, the more the default mode network kind of disassembled and it's really kind of astonishing. And that's That first paper was Imperial College London back in 2012. Then there have been several other papers that I'm aware of. One was out of Brazil looking at DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the active principle in ayahuasca. And then a more recent paper from Robin Carhart Harris and others at Imperial College London, where they actually looked at LSD, which is probably one of the most potent of those serotonin 2A type drugs.
Yeah.
That's what they're normally known as, is serotonin 2A agonist antagonists. So that's the amazing thing to point out is uh, these scientific experiments reveal very clearly to us that more profound, kind of exotic and ultra real experiences in many ways are associated with the brain going dark. And so in many ways, it's showing us that the brain is not producing consciousness at all. And this, of course, is something we'll go into in great detail in Living in a Mindful Universe. And it's really getting the brain out of the way that allows for some of these more extraordinary manifestations of conscious awareness, both in this material realm and in other realms that are very relevant to human existence. I think there's similarities with the realms that are encountered in near death or in
Mhm.
deathbed vision, in dying experiences. As we see in the dream world and in the psychedelic world, there's a lot of overlap because those various spiritual realms have a concrete reality in existence. They don't exist in four-dimensional space-time. That doesn't make them less real. Uh, Sentient beings have access to them. So that's the first major point is these scientific studies very clearly show that if you want to pretend the brain creates consciousness, it certainly doesn't seem to be doing that under the influence of these particular plant medicines. I hesitate to use the word hallucinogen. I think that's a terrible word
It is
because that implies that everything you're experiencing there is an unreal hallucination. And I would say that's very
bogus.
wrong, and that kind of interpretation is what's gotten us into so much trouble to not pay attention to more of the lessons we learned there. Now, the second major point that I always like to make about psychedelics is based on some therapeutic work that's been done specifically with psilocybin, magic mushrooms,
Mhm.
in the last several years, maybe 10 years or so. And this is work, luckily, there are scientific investigators at places like NYU and at Johns Hopkins, at UCLA, and other major medical centers around the world that have gotten exemption certificates to study,
Mhm.
scientifically study the effects of these plant medicines and how they work. And some of the best work that I'm aware of that's been done along those lines concerns the use of a therapeutic use of magic mushrooms or psilocybin in the setting of one setting that's very near and dear to my heart is fear of death in cancer patients.
Yeah.
And there's a study that came out a few years ago that showed kind of a dramatic improvement in uh, uh, in patients who had a tremendous kind of paralyzing fear of death after a terminal diagnosis. And astonishing as it may seem, one dose of psilocybin in a proper therapeutic environment can be effective for months and years
Mhm.
in alleviating fear of death. Now, there are other studies that have used magic mushrooms or psilocybin in the treatment of various addictions, alcoholism, drug addictions, things like that. Also, with extremely powerful positive results after one simple dose, again, in a proper therapeutic setting. And the reason I bring those things up is in Living in a Mindful Universe, we talk a lot about kind of healing and placebo effect, mind over matter. In fact, the whole argument we're making in that book is that objective idealism is a true philosophical model for the workings of the universe. And for those who might not be aware of what objective idealism means, I will say it's also a synonym with analytic idealism, with ontological idealism, and with metaphysical idealism. All four of those kind of terms with idealism are talking about the same kind of thing, which is basically that there's a mental layer of the universe that is primary. And that is what causes, has a kind of a top-down causal role in determining how things shake out down here in the material realm. And the interesting thing about it, of course, is that that layer is mental. And it turns out that as human beings, as sentient beings, our sentience basically says we have a direct entry level kind of awareness of that mental layer of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And so in these kind of studies where the psilocybin is somehow enabling people to overcome addictions, overcome fear of death, things like that in such dramatic fashion, what we would postulate is going on is that that psilocybin is basically thinning the veil.
Yes.
Again, that's something we feel one can do very effectively with binaural beat brainwave entrainment like sacred acoustics.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I think that with a dedicated program, you can do even better than you could do with those plant medicines. But that
Mm-hmm.
remains to be demonstrated. It's just Karen and I have seen, benefits in our workshops, and there's a pilot study that Dr. Anna Yusum did with sacred acoustics tones that was published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in February of 2020. And that pilot study by Dr. Yusum um, actually demonstrated a profound beneficial effect of binaural beat of sacred acoustics tones given to her patients, basically revealing a 26% reduction in anxiety and depression over 2 weeks for those who listened to the tones versus only a 7% reduction in those who did not listen to the tones but went through standard kind of talk therapy from a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that study goes a long way at supporting sacred acoustics. We have other kind of pilot studies we're trying to get going in hospice centers that use sacred acoustics in an effort to facilitate shared death experiences. People who want to learn more about those, shared death is very similar to near death, the same kind of phenomenal qualities of a near death experience. But the shared death occur in people who are physiologically normal for the most part, a loved one at the bedside, or maybe a loved one 1,000 miles away from a dying patient. The soul of the departing patient can come right
Yeah.
through and take the soul of the bystander along, even to witnessing a full-blown life review before coming back to this world. So shared death is a beautiful kind of example of this traversing that veil and getting into those realms without even having an NDE. But
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that through binaural beat brainwave entrainment, that all of us have the capacity to explore consciousness to that kind of depth, the same depth as an NDE or a shared death experience with a dedicated program of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think kind of the bottom line of this message is if you look at that use of psilocybin for fear of death and for addiction and alcoholism as basically a means of kind of traversing beyond your ego mind, the little voice of the self, the linguistic voice in the head, and connecting with that deeper essence of who you are, which is that awareness of existence. That part is the mystery. From a scientific perspective, that is, it's our awareness of existence in the universe that is so difficult to explain
Mm-hmm.
and does not resolve very simply with materialist models of brain creates consciousness. There is so much more to consciousness, especially when you consider all the kind of qualities of non-local consciousness, things like telepathy, remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, remote healing, um, the effects of prayer in healing, things like that. And then, of course, you have deathbed visions, after death communications. And then, of course, that other huge category of non-local consciousness, kind of consciousness beyond the physical brain model. And that is the extraordinary literature on reincarnation out of
Mm-hmm.
the University of Virginia and other researchers around the world. But for your listeners, go to uvadops.org to learn a lot more about that literature. But in a nutshell, more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children studied over the last 6 decades, where the best explanation is really one of reincarnation. So
Mm-hmm.
we just need a much bigger theater of operations. But the model that we propose in Living in a Mindful Universe is one of this primordial mind, that God force mind that people encounter in deep transcendental NDEs and other spontaneous epiphanies. That God force pure love binding us all together as one, is the very origin of our conscious awareness,
Yeah.
not separate from us at all. And that is the part that helps us to start linking all this together and making sense of it. So, um, in talking about using psilocybin for addiction and fear of death, things like that, all I believe is happening is you're thinning that veil, allowing your kind of conscious awareness to traverse that, move beyond the ego mind, the little voice in our heads. That's what Michael Singer calls the annoying roommate in his book,
Hmm.
The Untethered Soul.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
a beautiful way to put it. That little voice in our head, the annoying roommate, is not who we are. At a deep soul level, we're much more than that. And that's what we can explore and discover through these techniques. And I believe, as much as in medicine, we harp on placebo effect. I mean, it's so acknowledged to be a real concrete effect that it's the gold standard for assessing any new medical treatment. And a lot of surgical procedures can actually be put into a placebo-controlled arm with a sham procedure where the true essence of the procedure is not done, but the skin incision and all the other things for the patient are done the same way, just to see a placebo, their beliefs
Hmm.
can work the magic of healing them. And what you find is placebo effect is very real. Probably, across the board, it's something like 30% of all the benefit that we attribute to medications is really just coming from this belief that people can get better. And so then when you look at thinning the veil, whether it's through the use of the magic mushrooms, or as I said, what I would recommend using binaural beats to
Hmm.
get across the veil to that primordial mind and that kind of essence of self, that's where I think we can truly manifest more powerful healing,
Hmm.
bringing our kind of reuniting with our higher souls in this lifetime, in this body, and realizing that it all has to do with a tremendous amount of love, compassion, and kindness for self. I mean, I realized after my NDE that most of the problems of this world were not because we didn't love our neighbor or love our enemy enough, till we didn't even love ourselves enough. We've lost track of the deep, powerful, rich, sacred, divine beings that we all are as souls. And it's by recovering that. And it's not an egotistical kind of, I'm this
Yeah,
great
yeah.
thing. It's actually much more of an acknowledgement of our common relationship with all of our fellow beings. And
Mm.
that this is all about manifesting that love for others. And the best way to do that is really to serve as a conduit for that love. And it's really by these deep, kind of emotion laden kind of journeys into the heart of consciousness that we actually start to glean this ability to bring that healing into our lives, so that um, the healing of placebo effect is just kind of the beginning of what we can bring into our lives. It's not only our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, but really all the events of our lives, our relationships, our ability to help others, and to glean the kind of natural benefits that accrue from being of service to others and trying to contribute to the highest good in this world. I mean, these are all very healthy things to do. And if you meditate, I try and meditate an hour or two a day. You don't have to do it that much, but if you can take 15 or 20 minutes a day to quiet your mind, and if you have trouble with that little voice in the head running amok, try Sacred Acoustics. It's a very powerful tool. Go to sacredacoustics.com and just try listening to that free 20-minute file through headphones. Headphones are very important because binaural beats have their best effect when you can isolate the signal to the two ears. But this really, it's all about kind of bringing that placebo effect, widely acknowledged in medicine to be real. Mind over matter has
Mhm.
tremendous power. And that's really what we're talking about here. But it's not the little ego mind, as the ego basically uses fear and anxiety to
Yeah.
try and control you. And, that's all a tiny little parlor trick down in the back left corner of your bedroom closet compared to
Yeah.
what's really going on
Yeah.
throughout this universe when you start uniting with your higher soul and kind of recognizing you have access to loved ones who have left the physical world. They can serve as guides. They do for me, on a very regular basis. I
Absolutely.
appeal in meditation to the various entities and powers, and that infinitely healing God force that I encountered in my NDE is something I develop a relationship all the time in my meditation. So these are just ways, suggestions for how people can take this kind of worldview, this kind of mind over matter view, start realizing their true potential, and then start living it.
Hmm.
And it's never just about the meditation and the going within, even though that's a very powerful tool to help us bring positive change to this world.
Hmm.
It's really about how we live our lives. And so, one of the things Karen and I often say is the true power of near-death experiences is not what they tell us about what happens after our body dies and we leave the physical world, but the lessons are absolutely crucial for living the optimal lives here,
Hmm.
knowing fully our divine nature, that we've had lives before, we'll have lives again, but that we're following a soul journey of
Yeah.
this progressive, uh, basically the transformation and evolution of consciousness itself. And
Yeah.
each and every one of us is a participant in that grand process.
Yeah. And it was, you spoke about, I was going to say also binaural beats for everyone that's listening. Sacredacoustics.com. As someone that's meditated every day since 2008, I have been using Sacred Acoustics since we last spoke, and it absolutely works. It's the you slow down. And it's one thing I noticed a lot meditating in college was, as someone that experiment, albeit not in a clinical setting, with psychedelics, I can say, as profound as those were and as helpful as those were, they still don't hold a candle to meditation. And it's one thing I always remember from college is the deepest meditations I'd note how slow my heart got, how much my shoulders and legs relaxed. Muscles were relaxing that I didn't even know were tense. And it kind of makes me think of that, plus the psilocybin fMRIs, where it slows down, or, the brain doesn't light up like the Christmas tree. And then the beautiful parallels to, okay, so now the goal is to turn off the mind. Well, who would know it better rather than you, right? With, being in the coma where your mind was turned off.
Well, it was
Right?
really, I would say, brain is turned off.
Yes, yes, brain.
And of course, the brain is not the producer of mind. That's the
It's the
important thing.
receiver.
Mind is something that actually participates in creating brain and physical body and all the rest of physical reality. But ultimately, it's all being governed from that mental layer. And that's why placebo effect works, for example. I mean, when you wonder, I mean, believe me, and modern medical training is very schizophrenic in some ways because the training is still heavily based in the reductive materialist science of the 20th and early 21st century. But the good news is that medical schools are catching up. 30 years ago, if you look for any spiritual courses in medical schools, there basically were none. And now a recent survey suggests that something like 70% of North American medical schools now have at least one course addressing spirituality in healing and health. So we are slowly making progress. But it's kind of astonishing that people often don't even think of what placebo effect is really telling you about the nature of reality, this
It's
power of mind over matter.
what it implies is absolutely insane. It's I'll never forget studying for the MCAT. And in those like final 3 weeks, I'd get up, I'd work out, I'd meditate, and I'd study, and I'd take a little orange caffeine pill. And then at night, I'd meditate, and I would take this like kind of off yellow melatonin. And it was
Uh,
just hitting it all day, every day for like 20 days. And I'll never forget one day that I realized as I was going to bed that the caffeine pill was next to my table. That morning, I had taken the melatonin. And sure enough, 10 minutes in, the caffeine hit, and I studied for 12 hours. I'll never
uh,
forget that, where I was like, what does that reveal about reality? I
right,
thought that was a stimulant. And so I studied like there was no tomorrow.
right.
Yeah, that bent my mind over
Yeah,
back.
there's a lot to our beliefs, and
Yeah.
we tend to doubt our power, and in
Yeah.
our society, the vast majority of beliefs are falsely limiting.
Mm,
They say you cannot do that, you can't do this. Well, in fact, what we find is placebo effect, and it goes way beyond just a sugar pill curing a headache.
mhm.
If you go to noetic.org.
Yeah.
That's the
Edgar Mitchell.
Institute
Yeah.
of Noetic Sciences website, and put in that search term for spontaneous remission, you'll find a book they published in the mid 90s with more than 3,500 cases of people of having recoveries beyond any expectation of Western medicine, either beyond the medical intervention they were given or when that intervention had failed,
Hmm.
to then successfully eradicate a cancer or an infection, 3,500 plus cases. And I understand that they are now reassessing and rebuilding that database with all new data. So that'll be very exciting to see that project come into fruition. But even the data that's there as of mid 1990s is kind of stunning in terms of the power of mind over matter and healing. And really, it's there for all of us. And that's why it's something to be shared and championed and kind of embraced and explored. And I think the one other point I would make about this kind of mind and brain and these exotic experiences is remember that um, for the people who are experiencing those plant medicines, basically those plant medicines, the psychedelics basically affect some of the receptor populations in the neocortex. And that's how they kind of alter your awareness of realms beyond the material. And the binaural beats are actually going at a target in the lower brainstem. And
Hmm.
I believe this is one reason why Christopher Bache and others, and I would say my own experience, certainly have found tremendous power in binaural beat brainwave entrainment, is by intersecting the kind of engine that modern neuroscience would look at as the engine of consciousness in the brain. And that engine works just as well as if you're thinking it's a filtering mechanism and primordial consciousness that originates outside the brain or a production model. But they really show that by modulating this lower brainstem center that came in evolutionary biology before mammals even walked this earth. It's more than 300 million years old. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that binaural beats and sacred acoustics in particular have such a powerful ability to kind of separate your conscious awareness from the normal kind of machinations of day-to-day consciousness in this realm. But it's working at a level much more primitive and this much more powerful than those psychedelics that are mainly just having a little toehold
Hmm.
up in the neocortex.
Hmm. I would say an analogy would be like treating like alcoholism as like an addiction versus like going to the root and finding out like what went wrong and the upbringing of the child and the home life. Binaural beats
Well,
is
yeah,
going
that
back
it's
to the core.
it is a soul journey that involves many, many things, and it's not just nature, the biology, the DNA, but there's also nurture, the
Nurture, yeah.
events of their lives. There's a tremendous amount that plays into it, and of course, once you really start getting the big picture about the reality of that reincarnation story that we've told, you realize we've all been here before, and we have program forgetting, so we're not meant to have full
Yeah.
vibrant knowledge of that our higher soul has all through our lifetimes living these lives.
Yeah.
But that's where meditation and NDEs and all that kind of thing are important because they kind of tip the hand and reveal to us that there's much more to this universe than what we commonly assume in our day-to-day lives. And understanding that is crucial to blossoming into the beings that we truly are,
Yeah.
these divine sacred beings, that whole world of transpersonal psychology, beginning with the work of Carl Jung and Charles Tart, Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, um, and Stan Groff and others, these brilliant clinical investigators really pointed the way towards the fact to fully understand the events of this life. I have to realize I've been here before. I'll be back again. It's a big soul journey that's very exciting with tremendous potential for change once I get the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And getting that bigger picture is a tremendous resource in making your life far more meaningful and productive.
Yeah, and I think you just said it very well. And I know I said it only keep you for 30 minutes, but I have a couple more questions, so I'll wrap it up really quickly. But I was gonna say, yeah, real quick, yeah, that programmed forgetfulness. You're not supposed to remember everything because you're here to learn a lesson, right? You're supposed to forget you're in a theater when you're watching the movie, so you can
Right.
temporary,
Exactly right. You need to
yeah,
buy in.
yes, you're supposed to let go, and then, but you can tap into it in the same way that during a scary movie at an IMAX theater, meditation is like you can step outside and go to the restroom real quick and you see the
Right.
lights and it's quiet and you hear the elevator music and you go, oh yeah, oh yeah, and then you can
Got it. I got the
psych
big
yourself
picture.
back. Yeah. um
Beautiful
yeah,
analogy. I
thank
love
you.
it.
And so three quick questions. One is what are your next works in the pipeline? Do you have any books coming out?
Well, yes, there's definitely one on my mind. And
Okay.
Karen and I are very busy. We're doing a
Sure.
course now with the Shift Network. We just finished one in the fall. We've got another one that we're very excited about now. This is all work that Karen has spearheaded. She has a brilliant kind of spiritual knowledge of ancient traditions all the way up to current era. And so in the Shift Network, we're doing a beautiful course where we're really uniting much of the ancient wisdom going all the way back to ancient Egypt, which had a tremendous influence on Greece, on the Middle East, probably even also on India and China, even though that's a little more challenging to demonstrate. But the reality is we're doing all that, but relating it to modern advances in the science of consciousness and neuroscience, philosophy of mind, quantum physics, to try and help elucidate how some of the greatest ancient wisdom was right on the money. And in
Mhm.
many ways, they knew exactly what the true nature of this universe was that we're only now kind of rediscovering in some way. It's absolutely astonishing, but there's a tremendous amount to it, and it kind of helps in the personal journey that we're talking about here, because it helps to refine your worldview of understanding. And of course, in this Shift Network course, we're doing a meditation every one of the 9 modules. So you get deep benefits of sacred acoustics meditations with each one. And kind of parallel to that, I think Karen may be working on a book that takes that course kind of to the next level. In the meantime, I haven't started writing yet, but I'm realizing that living in a mindful universe, it turns out within months after that book came out, I had some great kind of clarifying insights about the mechanism, about this relationship between mind and brain, and um, and also much clarification of kind of the quantum physics angle coming into it and proving the reality of the one mind. And so I think there is definitely another book at least that I need to be writing about this. So, the COVID pandemic is still going. So I guess it's a great time to write. We're
Yeah.
not traveling at all. So, time to get to it. But I would just invite your listeners, join us in there's a free biweekly webinar that we give with a lot of interesting guests. You can access that at unitedinhopeandhealing.com. And likewise, there's a 9-hour video course that we're giving to healthcare workers, mental health therapists, that is with Dr. Anna Newsom. I mentioned her case report a short while ago. That course is available at becomingmorewhole.com. People can go there and learn a lot more about that course material, and it's really written for the seeker. So even those who are not healthcare professionals, it can be, we wrote it so it would be helpful for people who are seeking their own kind of mental health and techniques in this challenging era of COVID and the economic collapse. So those are all kind of avenues where people can join us and learn a lot more. Come to evanalexander.com and sacredacoustics.com. These are really the efforts moving forward. I would say the scientific work continues, certainly trying to come up with the best way to tie all this together to where it makes sense to everybody. But the reality is the evidence from a scientific perspective, not only supporting the afterlife, but also reincarnation. And again, models that fully support the power behind placebo effect and mind over matter. That is already there. That's where living in a mindful universe is coming from. But it's just time to take next steps beyond that.
Yes, sir. And I'll put all those links in the description and stick it in the top comment. I would love if she would be interested. I would love
Yeah,
to have Karen on here sometime.
I think
Um,
we should do that.
that would be amazing. So, and I know I'm gone 5 minutes. Hi, I would love to have you on sometime. That would be awesome.
Awesome. Yes, schedule it with Elizabeth.
Yes,
We would
yes.
love to. You'll find Karen is my best half, not
Okay.
just my better half. She is the best. And that comes out in our interviews. Yeah, she's a real delight. And she also brings it to a level where, I tend to get a little kind of lost in the clouds sometimes in my scientific
No,
explanations.
I love
And
it. That's
she
my
is
favorite
very
part.
good at bringing it down to earth.
That's my favorite part about you is you come on here and it just let it go and I watch it blossom. It's beautiful. I absolutely love it. I know I've gone 6 minutes over already, but I have two more quick questions.
All right.
One, is there any way whatsoever you could you're or have worked with Joseph McMoneagle, correct?
Yes.
Is there any way whatsoever? I'm such a huge fan of his, but I can't get in touch with him. Is there
Well, I tell you what, I love Joe. He's a great guy. We're not really close, but
Okay.
I could reach out to him.
That would
It's
be,
not
that
like we're
would,
close friends, but we've had
sure.
some time together and conversations together.
Sure.
And I'd be happy to try and put out an invite to
Thank you, sir.
facilitate that.
Thank you, sir. I'm
Joe's a
such, yeah.
fantastic guy and resource, but he's also very much in demand. So I can't make
Yes.
any
Yes.
promises at all. But
Yes, sir.
yeah, I could certainly reach out to him and see if he'd be willing. Uh, I guess the only pieces I would need to make that argument, if you can give us some of your latest kind of information on your distribution, on kind of the
Sure,
numbers,
sure, sure.
that kind of,
Absolutely.
thing. If you can pass that back to me
Absolutely.
through Elizabeth, I can then pass that on to Joe because
Absolutely.
he would probably want some kind of background information like that.
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely. I understand. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot like that.
no
I'm such
problem.
a big fan of his. I was like, I
Oh,
gotta
oh,
ask
he's
him.
and I would highly recommend his books. People can
Yeah.
look Joseph McMonigal up on Amazon. He's written several very powerful
Yeah.
books on your mind as a time machine and remote viewing and
Yeah.
various tips. And of course, he was RV001,
Yeah. Yeah.
Remote Viewer 001. That's a
yeah.
lot classier than 007, I
Yeah.
promise you.
Yeah.
And also having met him and discussed some of those stories, he is absolutely the real deal.
Yeah.
So
His lectures are incredible.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then and this is more so of a perhaps a topic for a future episode. Yeah, not even really a question, is more so of a topic or teaser, is kind of like last time we left off on psychedelics. I guess on this time I'd like to leave off on, I don't know if you've thought about it. What are the implications of something like Neuralink, where personally it terrifies me. It kind of sounds dystopian, but just to play with that idea, is if somehow that was linked up with something like binaural beats or sacred acoustics, is there a way for a sort of therapeutic implanted meditative state, or is that getting too
Well,
Frankenstein?
what I would tell you is we already have all the equipment implanted we need
Okay.
to use it through the kind of natural pathways. Important to point out, Neuralink, um, it's still very, very preliminary,
Yeah. Yeah.
and in fact, the information that I've gleaned on it, it's hardly like we've made many steps in the last few decades beyond a lot of the technology I was aware of and used in brain surgery back in the 90s and early 2000s. And the hype really kind of overdoes it. There are still
Mm-hmm.
tremendous challenges to how you implant something like Neuralink, and not only that, but then how you program it to intersect with the brain.
Mm.
And those are gigantic hurdles. They're basically the same kind of hurdles we were looking at 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So Neuralink is not like some gigantic, massive step into the future. It's a positive step, but believe me, we've got a tremendous way to go before any of that um, would make a big difference. I remember, I must confess, as I have a little bit of a kind of a sci-fi geek side to me, and one of my favorite novels back in the 90s and early thousands was Neuromancer
Okay.
by William Gibson. And in that's a beautiful novel. I remember one of the blurbs on the cover. It says, "The future as nightmare."
Yeah.
But the basic theme of the book is the world's gotten to a point where you cannot tell cyberspace from this space, and
Yeah.
there's complete overlap. In fact, you have people who have died and left their bodies long ago, but they downloaded their experience onto the net, and it kept growing and maturing over time. It's a fantastic story, but Neuralink brings it to mind because they had what they called, and that book was written in the mid 1980s. They had what they call microsofts that were kind of a chip that you would put into a slot behind your ear that slotted with your brain, slotted with your brain in ways that allowed this incredible overlap of reality and cyber reality. But the thing is, we don't need all that. We have the tools we need. If you have ears and you have binaural beats from Sacred Acoustics, you can get some real power right there out of mind over matter.
Yeah. It's, oh
You
yeah.
don't need
It's,
the little
yeah.
Microsoft behind the ear like
Yeah.
William Gibson portrayed it.
Yeah. And Neuralink kind of seems maybe more so like the right flyer, like very exciting, but hey, we're not going to the moon
It's
tomorrow.
extremely preliminary, and I think ultimately that approach of trying to intersect with very fine electrode grids with the cells of the brain is we're going to find that it just um, really too much of an impediment, certainly in an intact brain. There are some arguments for how you can use it in brains that are very damaged, like people after strokes, after head injuries, trying to kind of recover function in damaged neural tissue. But it turns out the brain can already do a tremendous amount of that on its own.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Yeah.
learning more and more about neuroplasticity, which is a
Yeah.
profound form of mind over matter that kind of restructures the brain. And I would say that some of the stroke recovery protocols we're getting into now are far more powerful in delivering good results than things we had 20 and 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we're finally getting, to some good points on that. But mind over matter has tremendous power to heal, even when you're not using Neuralink and some other technological kind of bridge to get there.
Yeah. And I've kept you for 50% longer than I said I would. So thank you for your patience, sir. I'll put all the links to those websites, sacredacoustics.com, as well as Living in a Mindful Universe and Proof of Heaven, both of which are narrated by Dr. Alexander. And as an Audible connoisseur, they're fantastically done. So those will be in the description, sticky in the top comment. I will reach out to Elizabeth about having on you and Karen. I look forward to
Excellent.
that. And again, thank you for your patience. I know
All
I
right,
kept you a
Tommy,
lot
thank you so
longer.
much for having me on. It's great talking with you again.
Yes, sir. And as always, as Ram Dass said about Neem Karoli Baba, it was like being near a warm campfire. I said it last time. That's what I get when I'm talking to you. There's a warm glow
Good.
that comes off of you. So that I cannot give a greater compliment than that. So
Well,
thank
I
you.
certainly love talking with you too, Tommy. Your
Thank you,
spirit
sir.
comes through very, very robustly,
Oh, well, thank
and
you,
it's a
sir.
great spirit to have. So thanks for sharing that with the
Yes,
world.
sir. God bless, and you have a good one.
All right, you too, Tommy. We'll talk soon.
Yes, sir.